Well, hey there, and welcome to Unmistakably You. I'm Amy. I'm a wedding planner and educator here in London, Ontario, and I come live to you every Wednesday night, or pretty much every Wednesday night as we get closer to and into wedding season to talk about things that are hopefully relevant in your wedding planning journey. So, as always, if you have a question or a comment or something you're wondering about, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to hear from you. I'm popping in tonight to talk about something that may be, depending on when you are getting married, relevant to you very soon, and that is when to print your day of stationery. Now, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your day of stationery is anything that actually is used at your wedding physically on the day. It's nothing that gets sent out beforehand or after. We're just talking the things at your wedding that your guests are going to see that realistically are going to serve to guide them through the process or direct them to a seat, things like that. So first and foremost, I'm always an advocate for trying to design all of your stationery at the same time or with the same person. If you have a stationer that you're working with, it would probably serve you well to design your invitations and your day of stationery at the same time to make sure that it's really cohesive in color and font and design and graphics and that kind of thing. But don't waste your designer time early in the process by having them design all your place cards, for instance, because your guest list is not going to be finalized at that point. So you probably want to get closer to the wedding before you have them fill in any of those blanks, like actual guest names or printing actual numbers of tables. But you certainly can have them designed so that they're easier to sort of plug and play when you have your guest list confirmed and you get closer to the day of the wedding. Now, when you do get closer to the day of the wedding, you certainly can check some of those things off of the list with having to be the week before. Things like your table numbers, for instance, presumably you could probably have printed the month before. At that point, you probably have a pretty solid idea of who is coming and who is not. You could even have those printed earlier, although it's always more affordable to have your stationery printed in bulk rather than having to come back and add an extra piece later. So if you are going to have things like table numbers printed early, make sure that if you're going to err on one side or the other, you err on the side of having too many rather than too few, because it's going to be cheaper ultimately to print more than you need than it is to print an extra one or two later on down the road. But things like your table numbers and your signage, miscellaneous signage, could presumably be printed maybe a month, maybe even 6 weeks before the day. And when I say miscellaneous signage, I'm talking about things like maybe a welcome sign or maybe a sign to go with your bathroom baskets or your cards and gifts or your guest book sign, things that you know aren't going to change. You could certainly have those printed a little bit earlier. You can frame them, you do whatever you're going to do with them, pack them in your totes so they're ready for whoever's setting up your decor. If you're inclined to print an itinerary or a menu card, for instance, you'll want to make sure, or even a bar menu for that matter, you want to make sure that you've finalized those decisions with your venue first. So you have your ceremony time set before you print that itinerary sign. And when it comes to itinerary signs, I would always caution you to be a little bit more general and a lot less specific, because if you put dinner starts at 6:02 and then you're a few minutes late, guests might be confused or they might call you on it. I mean, nobody's really going to call you out on your wedding day, but they might bring your attention to the fact that it's not exact. So I always kind of go with a general order with maybe some signposts for times like ceremony time and dinner start. I wouldn't put on like first dance, first speech, that kind of thing. But with regard to anything like that, you want to make sure you have those times nailed down or drink and menu choices nailed down before you print those. And you want to make sure that those aren't likely to change. So that usually puts you in the realm of somewhere about a month out. If you are going to print some kind of direction for guests to be seated, which I would advise you to do, I'm always an advocate for a seating plan rather than saying, oh, we're just going to be casual, we're not going to have assigned seating. That's another topic for another day, but that leads to a lot of confusion and chaos in my experience. But if you're printing something along the lines of a seating chart and place cards, or maybe you're just printing a seating chart, or maybe you're printing escort cards, those kinds of things, you want to wait till a little closer to the day to print. And that also is kind of dependent on the style that you're going with. So just for explanation purposes, an escort card is an individual card very similar to a place card. It could be really functional in terms of it just being like a basic tent fold, or it could be a really beautiful design element, depending on how you want to set it up. But often escort cards are set up at the entrance to your hall or your dinner space. And as guests come in, they're going to find their name alphabetically, because otherwise it takes forever. And then they're going to pick up their card and see that it says on the back, table 8 or table 6. That's going to tell them where to go, and then they are going to choose their own seat at that table. So if you are printing escort cards, you certainly could do it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 4 weeks in advance once you've gotten your RSVPs in. But you do have to be careful that if you're printing those, your table assignments aren't going to change. So if for some reason a family gets sick, like maybe they come down with COVID the week before the wedding, which we're seeing a lot, if you lose a whole family, does that then mean that you're going to rotate someone else into that space at the table? Or are you sure that your table arrangements are going to stay the same? At the point when you're sure they're going to stay the same, print the cards. And then if guests are unable to come because of whatever reason last minute, you just don't set out their escort card, and no harm, no foul. You just want to make sure that you're not asking for changes last minute, because again, those are going to be the most expensive ones. So once you're sure that those table assignments are set, get the escort cards printed and then put them in alphabetical order. It makes it easy to remove any guests that have to cancel last minute. And with any guests that do have to cancel last minute, make sure that you advise your caterer or your decorator or whoever it is that's setting your tables, so that they can take off those place settings, so that you don't have two awkwardly empty places at table 8 if a couple is unable to come for whatever reason. So that's escort cards. Now, the other option would be to do either just a seating chart at some prominently displayed area at the entrance to the hall, or you could do a seating chart in conjunction with place cards. You would never do place cards on their own, because those are the cards that sit at the tables and they distinguish which chair each guest sits in. So if you're doing place cards with a seating chart, those also could, in theory, be printed a little bit early. You could print them about a month before the wedding. And then again, if a guest is unable to come, you just simply take their card out, don't have it set around the table, and make sure that you communicate that that place shouldn't be set at the table. Nobody's going to know that that guest was ever supposed to be on the list as long as you don't set their place card. So those could be printed in advance, let's say maybe a month out. Again, you don't want to print them a year out, because what happens if an entire family or group of friends is unable to come, or for whatever reason, a large number of people have to cancel? You don't want a whole bunch of place cards that you're not going to use. But if you print them the month before, then perhaps a couple of guests need to get pulled out and it's not a big deal. With your seating chart, you are either going to have the seating chart and the place cards, or just the seating chart. The design is kind of dependent on when you print it. There are beautiful options in lots of different styles that you've probably seen. If you think that there might be a need to reprint closer to the date, you may want to choose a style that has individual cards for each table, or individual, let's say I've seen names done in vinyl on vases or candle holders, that kind of thing. If you want something individual with tables done separately from each other, it's a lot easier to reprint one of those if need be. But I would generally advise that you leave the printing of a seating chart, if you can, until the week before the wedding, because then you can take out any of those cancellations that might happen a couple of weeks before. Nothing's ever going to make it perfect, so that, the person that cancels the day before because they've come down with COVID, for instance, you can't take them off, no matter what style. But if there are changes, it's easier to reprint one of those individual cards or vases than it would be to print the entire seating chart. Again, it's pricier to reprint one of something. So try to get them done all earlier if possible. If you're going with a style of seating chart that's one large poster or one large mirror with vinyl on it, for instance, realistically, I would advise not doing that for the week before the wedding. And even then, again, you may have some last minute cancellations. If you wait until about a week out, it should still be lots of time for your printer to get it done, but it's also close enough to the wedding that you may catch some of those cancellations that might happen in the couple weeks before the wedding. Again, if there are cancellations the week before the wedding, nobody will ever notice that those people are on the seating chart, but not at the wedding, unless it's close family and friends, and they will understand. Nobody's ever going to count how many people should be at table 7 and recognize that you're down 1 or 2. So I would advise you, if you have had something printed and you're missing guests, don't try to DIY it. Don't try to remove those guests. Leave it as it is, and then just have your caterer remove those places. With seating cards or place cards and escort cards, it's easy to just leave them out. And then if those names do appear on a separate seating chart, just forget about it. Nobody will ever notice. So generally speaking, if you can design your stationery early, it makes it a lot easier to have the names personalized when you get your RSVPs in. And then I would advise printing things anywhere between about a month or 6 weeks out for those generic pieces, and then somewhere around 1 to 2 weeks out for seating charts, place cards, and escort cards. As always, if you have any questions, I'm here to help. I'm happy to chat. You can email me, amy@unmistakably.you.com, or drop a message in the comments. We will see you here next Wednesday. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful weather, and happy planning.